Will an outlaw's compassion be enough to bridge the chasm between noble and commoner? Can a single act of kindness change the course of destiny itself? Journey with us into a tale where honor is not born of blood, but forged in the crucible of sacrifice. The winter of our Lord's year 1347 had shown no mercy to the realm of Ravenshollow, and it showed even less to those who dwelt beyond the protection of castle walls. In the heart of Blackwood Forest, where ancient oaks stretched their gnarled fingers toward a slate-grey sky, Gareth pulled his threadbare cloak tighter against the biting wind. The snow crunched beneath his worn leather boots as he moved with the practiced silence of one who had learned that survival meant becoming one with the shadows. 3 summers had passed since Lord Aldrich's proclamation had branded him outlaw. 3 summers since he had stolen grain from the Lord's granary to feed the starving children of Millhaven village. The irony was not lost upon him that those same children had likely perished in the harsh winter that followed, while he lived on in these forbidden woods like some cursed spirit, neither fully alive nor mercifully dead. The rabbit snare he had set near the frozen brook yielded nothing this morning, as it had for the past fortnight. His stomach gnawed at itself with a familiar hunger, and his fingers, despite the crude mittens he had fashioned from scraps of fur, had long since lost feeling in the bitter cold. Yet it was not the promise of food that made him pause at the edge of the clearing, but the sound that had no place in this desolate wilderness, the labored breathing of a man in mortal distress. Through the skeletal branches, Gareth glimpsed a sight that made his blood run cold. There, slumped against the base of a massive elm, sat a figure in the unmistakable blue and silver of House Ravenshollow. The knight's surcoat, though stained with mud and blood, bore the proud griffin that had haunted Gareth's nightmares for 3 long years. Even without seeing the man's face, he knew this could only be Sir Edmund, the very knight who had led the hunt that drove him into these woods, who had sworn before God and Lord that he would see Gareth hang from the castle gates. The knight's breathing came in short, ragged gasps that sent white clouds into the frigid air. 3 arrows protruded from his body like grotesque flowers, one buried deep in his left shoulder, another in his thigh, and a third that had pierced the gap in his armor just below the ribs. Dark blood had frozen in crimson streams down his armor, and his face, visible now beneath his helm, had taken on the waxy pallor that Gareth had seen too often in these woods, the look of a man walking the thin line between this world and the next. Every instinct screamed at Gareth to turn away, to let justice take its course in this lonely place. This was the man who had burned cottages in his search, who had terrorized innocent folk with threats and accusations, who had made it his sacred mission to drag Gareth back to face Lord Aldrich's noose. The forest would claim Sir Edmund as it had claimed so many others, and none would be the wiser. By spring, naught would remain, but bones picked clean by ravens and scattered by wolves. Yet as Gareth crouched in the underbrush, watching the life ebb slowly from his enemy, he found himself remembering not the knight's cruelties, but something else entirely. He remembered the voice of his grandmother, Eleanor the wise woman, who had taught him the healing arts before the fever took her. A soul's true measure, she had whispered on her deathbed, lies not in how it treats those who can aid it, but in how it treats those who cannot or will not return the kindness. The knight's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with pain. His lips moved soundlessly, perhaps in prayer, perhaps calling for aid that would never come. In that moment, Sir Edmund was no longer the proud hunter who had made Gareth's life a torment of fear and flight. He was simply a man alone and dying in the wilderness, as vulnerable as any creature that drew breath. Gareth's hand moved instinctively to the leather pouch at his side, where he kept the precious herbs and salves that had kept him alive these 3 years. Comfrey for wounds, willow bark for pain, honey from the wild hives to fight infection, all the knowledge his grandmother had pressed into his young mind, never imagining it might one day save the life of his persecutor. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of snow and death. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, and others answered, the forest's own heralds announcing that carrion would soon be available. Time was running short, and Gareth knew that within the hour, neither prayer nor medicine would avail the wounded knight. With a prayer to the Virgin for forgiveness, though whether for the kindness he was about to show or the hatred he had harbored, he could not say, Gareth rose from his hiding place and stepped into the clearing. Sir Edmund's eyes widened in recognition and fear, his hand moving weakly toward his sword hilt. "Peace, Sir Knight," Gareth said softly, raising his hands to show they held no weapons. "I mean you no harm." "You?" Edmund's voice was barely a whisper, thick with blood and disbelief. "Gareth, the outlaw." "Aye," Gareth replied, already kneeling beside his former hunter, his hands working to assess the wounds with practiced efficiency. "And you are Sir Edmund of Ravenshollow, who has spent 3 years seeking my head. Yet here we are, and here you are dying, and I find I cannot simply watch it happen." The knight's eyes searched Gareth's face, looking for some sign of mockery or cruelty, but finding only grim determination. "Why?" he managed to gasp. Gareth was already building a small fire with the dry tinder he always carried, melting snow in his battered copper cup to clean the wounds. "Because," he said, beginning to heat his grandmother's healing salve, "mercy is not the privilege of the innocent, but the burden of the living." As the first warm drops of herb-steeped water touched the knight's wounds, Sir Edmund's eyes widened not with pain, but with wonder, and perhaps for the first time in his life, with the beginning of understanding. Through the long hours of that bitter day, Gareth worked with the desperate intensity of a man racing against both death and discovery. The arrows had to come out, each one a test of his skill and the knight's endurance. Sir Edmund drifted in and out of consciousness, his body racked with fever, while Gareth drew upon every lesson his grandmother had taught him in their humble cottage so many years ago. "This will pain you greatly," Gareth warned as he gripped the shaft of the arrow in the knight's shoulder. The barbed head had lodged deep between bone and sinew, and extracting it would require both precision and strength. Sir Edmund managed a weak nod, biting down on the leather strap Gareth offered him. The outlaw's hands, steady despite the cold and the magnitude of what he attempted, worked the arrow free with agonizing care. Each movement sent fresh blood flowing, but Gareth pressed on, sealing the wound with heated iron and binding it with strips torn from his own cloak. The second arrow proved even more treacherous, having pierced the great muscle of the thigh and nicked the vessel that carried life's blood to the leg. Gareth worked by feel more than sight, his fingers probing the wound channel while he whispered the prayers his grandmother had taught him, not to God above, but to the ancient spirits of root and herb that had aided healers since time immemorial. "I know you," Sir Edmund whispered during a moment of clarity, his eyes focusing on Gareth's face with difficulty. "I remember. You were the miller's grandson. Your grandmother. She delivered my sister's first child." Gareth paused in his ministrations, surprised by this glimpse into a past he had thought forgotten. "Aye," he said softly. "Lady Catherine. The birth was difficult, but both mother and child lived. Grandmother spoke of it often, said it was one of her proudest moments." "Catherine died of the plague 2 years past," Edmund said, his voice heavy with grief. "But her son lives still. He would have died without your grandmother's skill." The words hung between them like a bridge across a chasm of old hatred. Gareth resumed his work, but something had shifted in the air of that small clearing. The third arrow, lodged dangerously close to the knight's heart, required all his concentration and a prayer to every saint he could remember. When it finally came free with a wet sound that made even Gareth's stomach turn, Sir Edmund's eyes rolled back, and he fell into the deep swoon that often preceded either recovery or death. As darkness began to fall, Gareth built up the fire and fashioned a crude shelter from pine boughs and his own cloak. He had little food to spare, but he boiled thin gruel from his last handful of barley and spooned it between the knight's lips whenever consciousness returned. Throughout the night he maintained his vigil, changing bloodied bandages, feeding the fire, and watching for the signs that would tell him whether his enemy would live or die. The fever broke near dawn, and with it came a change in Sir Edmund that was as profound as it was unexpected. Where before there had been only pain and delirium, now there was clarity, and with clarity came questions. "Why did you not let me die?" Edmund asked as Gareth helped him sip water from the copper cup. "You could have walked away. None would have known, and your greatest enemy would have been food for wolves." Gareth was quiet for a long moment, stirring the coals of their fire with a stick. "I thought of it," he admitted. "God knows I thought of it. But my grandmother used to say that every choice we make writes itself upon our soul, in letters that cannot be erased. I have done things I'm not proud of, stolen bread, poached game, struck men in anger. But I would not add murder to that tally. Even the murder of leaving a man to die when I might have saved him. Murder. Edmund's voice was stronger now, though still weak. It would have been justice. I have hunted you like an animal, driven you from hearth and home, made your very name a curse upon the lips of honest folk. Aye, Gareth nodded. You have done all that and more. But you did it believing you served justice, did you not? You believed you were protecting the innocent from a thief and a criminal. Sir Edmund was quiet for a long time, staring up at the patch of sky visible through the pine branches. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight it had not held before. Tell me true, Gareth of Millhaven, why did you steal Lord Aldrich's grain? And so, as the sun climbed higher and warmed their small refuge, Gareth told the story he had never been allowed to tell in any court of law. He spoke of the harsh winter that had followed a failed harvest, of children with bellies swollen from hunger, of mothers who wept over babies that would not wake. He told of his desperate plea to Lord Aldrich for aid, and the Lord's cold dismissal. He described the night he had broken into the granary, taking only what he thought might keep the youngest alive until spring could bring relief. I knew the penalty, Gareth said simply. I knew that taking so much as a single grain would mean my death if I were caught, but I could not stand by and watch innocents starve while rats grew fat in the Lord's stores. Sir Edmund listened in silence, and when the tale was done, he closed his eyes as though the telling had caused him physical pain. I remember that winter, he said quietly. I remember the reports of unrest in the villages, the talk of desperate folk driven to desperate measures. But Lord Aldrich said it was merely malcontents seeking to undermine his authority. And you believed him. I believed him because it was easier than believing the alternative. Edmund's voice was barely audible. Easier than admitting that we had failed in our duty to protect those who could not protect themselves. The confession hung between them like a sword, sharp and gleaming and dangerous. In that moment, both men understood that something fundamental had changed, not just in their relationship to each other, but in their understanding of the world itself. As the day wore on and Sir Edmund's strength slowly returned, they spoke of many things, of the nature of justice and mercy, of the duties of the strong to the weak, of the weight that every choice carries. And gradually, Gareth began to see in his former enemy, not the ruthless hunter who had plagued his dreams, but a man struggling to reconcile his actions with his conscience, a man not so different from himself. On the third day, when Sir Edmund could sit upright without swooning, and his wounds had begun to seal themselves with healthy flesh, they knew the time had come to leave their sanctuary. The knight was in no condition to travel far, but neither could remain in Blackwood Forest much longer. The wolves had grown bolder, drawn by the scent of blood, and Gareth's meagre supplies were nearly exhausted. I will not return to face Lord Aldrich's justice, Gareth said as he helped Edmund to his feet. Healing you changes nothing of what I am, an outlaw with a price upon his head. Sir Edmund leaned heavily upon the walking staff Gareth had cut for him, his face pale but determined. Then come with me not as prisoner but as my companion. There are things that must be said, truths that must be spoken. And you think Lord Aldrich will listen to such truths? That he will welcome the outlaw who stole from his stores because a knight speaks well of him? I think, Edmund said carefully, that Lord Aldrich values my counsel above that of most men, and I think that what has passed between us in these woods has opened my eyes to truths I was blind to before. They made slow progress through the forest, Edmund's injured leg forcing frequent rests. Gareth remained constantly alert, knowing that to be discovered helping the wounded knight would mean death for them both, though for different reasons. As they walked, Edmund told stories of his service to Lord Aldrich, of battles fought and honours won, but also of decisions that weighed heavily upon his conscience. There was a village, he said, as they rested beside a frozen stream. Thornwick, it was called. The people there were accused of harbouring bandits, of giving aid and comfort to enemies of the realm. Lord Aldrich ordered it burned as an example to others. Gareth looked up from where he was refilling their water skins. I remember Thornwick. The survivors came to Millhaven seeking shelter. I led the men who put torch to thatch. Edmund continued, his voice heavy with shame. We found no bandits, no weapons, no evidence of wrongdoing, only families trying to survive another harsh winter. But orders were orders, and I was a good and faithful knight. And now? Sir Edmund was quiet for a long moment, watching the ice crystals form at the stream's edge. Now I wonder how many other Thornwicks I have burned in the name of duty, how many other Gareths I have hunted, without truly understanding their crimes. As they drew closer to the borders of Lord Aldrich's lands, Gareth began to feel the familiar weight of fear settling upon his shoulders. Every shadow might hide a patrol, every distant sound might herald his capture. Yet Edmund seemed to draw strength from their proximity to home, walking with greater purpose despite his injuries. On their final night in the wilderness, as they huddled around a small fire in a cave Gareth had used before, the knight made a proposal that took the outlaw's breath away. "When we reach the castle tomorrow," Edmund said, "I will not present you as a captured criminal. I will present you as the man who saved my life, who showed mercy to his enemy when he might have chosen vengeance." Gareth shook his head vigorously. "Sir Edmund, I am grateful for your gratitude, but I am not fool enough to believe that sentiment will spare me the gallows. Lord Aldrich's law is clear." "Lord Aldrich's law," Edmund interrupted, "is what Lord Aldrich says it is, and Lord Aldrich values loyalty and service above all else. What greater loyalty could a man show than saving the life of his lord's most trusted knight, even when that knight had been his enemy? You speak of loyalty, but I am still the man who robbed his granary. Guy, you are, but you are also the man who could have let me die and chose instead to save me. That speaks to a character that Lord Aldrich would be wise to recognize and reward rather than punish." Through the long hours of that final night, they planned what they would say and how they would say it. Edmund would tell the tale of his wounding and rescue, emphasizing not only Gareth's skill as a healer, but his mercy as a man. He would speak of the conversations they had shared, of the new understanding that had grown between them. "And if Lord Aldrich remains unmoved?" Gareth asked. "If he sees only the criminal and not the man?" Edmund met his eyes across the dying fire. "Then I will stake my own honor upon yours. I will ask him to grant you the chance to prove yourself worthy of redemption, not through death, but through service." The words hung in the air like an oath, binding them together in a bond that neither had expected to forge. As dawn broke over the forest, for what might be the last time in Gareth's life, both men understood that they were about to test not only Lord Aldrich's capacity for mercy, but the very nature of justice itself. The gates of Ravenshollow Castle appeared through the morning mist like a vision from a half-remembered dream. Guards rushed forward at the sight of Sir Edmund, wounded and supported by the very outlaw they had hunted for 3 long years. Shouts of alarm and confusion filled the air, weapons were drawn, and for a moment it seemed that all of Edmund's carefully laid plans would come to naught in a rush of steel and blood. But the knight's voice, though weakened by his ordeal, still carried the authority of his rank and the respect of his years of service. "Hold!" he commanded, and the guards, trained to obey without question, reluctantly lowered their weapons. "This man is under my protection. He has saved my life, and I would have words with Lord Aldrich before any other action is taken." As they passed through the castle gates, Gareth felt the weight of 100 stares upon him. Servants whispered and pointed, soldiers muttered among themselves, and somewhere in the great keep above, he knew that Lord Aldrich was being informed of the extraordinary sight of his most wanted criminal walking freely into his stronghold. The hour of reckoning had come at last, and with it would come the answer to a question that neither mercy nor justice could answer alone: whether a man's worth was measured by his worst deed or his best, and whether redemption was possible for those who had the courage to seek it. The great hall of Ravenshollow Castle had witnessed many momentous occasions: declarations of war, celebrations of victory, the judgment of criminals, and the elevation of heroes. But never had it seen anything quite like the scene that unfolded on that cold winter morning, when Sir Edmund limped into Lord Aldrich's presence, supported by the outlaw Gareth, and requested an audience that would shake the very foundations of justice and mercy in the realm. Lord Aldrich sat upon his carved oak throne, his weathered face a mask of controlled fury and bewilderment. He was a man in his 5th decade, his beard more silver than black, his body still strong despite the weight of years and responsibility. Around him stood his council, knights, clerks, and nobles who had served his house for generations. At his right hand stood Sir Marcus, the castle's seneschal, whose cold eyes promised death for the outlaw who dared defile these sacred halls with his presence. "Explain yourself, Sir Edmund," Lord Aldrich commanded, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Explain how you come to stand before me wounded and weak, aided by the very criminal who has mocked our justice for 3 long years." Sir Edmund straightened despite his injuries, drawing upon reserves of strength that Gareth marveled to see. "My lord, I stand before you alive because this man, Gareth of Millhaven, chose mercy over vengeance, healing over hatred. He found me dying in Blackwood Forest, pierced by bandits' arrows, and though he had every reason to let death claim me, he instead spent 3 days and nights nursing me back to health." A murmur ran through the assembled court like wind through wheat. Some voices carried disbelief, others anger, but Gareth thought he heard something else as well, a note of curiosity, perhaps even admiration. "And why?" Lord Aldrich asked, his gaze shifting to Gareth. "Should I believe that this tale is anything more than a desperate fiction designed to save your worthless neck?" Before Gareth could speak, Sir Edmund stepped forward, his voice gaining strength. "Because, my lord, I bear witness to it. Because the wounds upon my body tell the tale of skilled healing, and because no man could feign the knowledge of herb and salve that saved my life. But more than that, because in those dark woods this man and I spoke truths that I had been too blind to see before." "Truths?" Sir Marcus interjected, his hand resting meaningfully on his sword hilt. "What truths could an outlaw and thief speak that would interest honest men?" Sir Edmund turned to face the seneschal, and in his eyes was a fire that Gareth had not seen before. The truth about Millhaven village, and the winter when children died of hunger while grain rotted in our stores. The truth about Thornwick, which we burned on suspicion alone. The truth about the difference between justice and vengeance, between law and cruelty. The hall fell deadly silent. Lord Aldrich's fingers drummed against the arm of his throne, a habit Gareth remembered from the single time he had stood before this court as a young man, pleading for aid that had been coldly refused. "You speak dangerous words, Sir Edmund," Lord Aldrich said quietly. "Words that could be interpreted as criticism of my rule, my justice." "I speak words that a dying man taught me," Edmund replied. "A man who had every reason to hate me, every justification for letting me perish alone and unmourned. Yet he chose instead to show me a mercy I had never shown others." Gareth found his voice at last, though it came out rougher than he intended. "My lord, I do not ask for forgiveness. I stole from your stores, and by your law, that crime demands my life. But I ask only that you know why I did it, not from greed or malice, but because I could not watch children starve when there was grain enough to save them." Lord Aldrich rose from his throne, his full height impressive even at his age. He descended the stone steps slowly, his eyes never leaving Gareth's face. When he stood before the outlaw, close enough to touch, Gareth could see the intelligence that had made him a successful lord, and the hardness that had kept him in power through decades of turmoil. "You admit your crime," Lord Aldrich said. "I do, my lord." "And you believe that justifies it?" Gareth met his lord's gaze steadily. "I believe, my lord, that a man must answer to his conscience as well as to his sovereign, and my conscience could not bear the death of innocence when I had the power to prevent it." For a long moment, silence stretched between them like a taut bowstring. Then Lord Aldrich did something that surprised everyone in the hall. He smiled. "Sir Edmund," he said, not taking his eyes from Gareth, "in your estimation, does this man possess the qualities that make a good knight? Courage, mercy, loyalty, skill in arms. He possesses all of these, my lord, and more. He has shown me what true nobility means, not the accident of birth, but the choice to act rightly when such action comes at great cost." Lord Aldrich nodded slowly. "Then hear my judgment. Gareth of Millhaven, you have indeed committed crimes against my law and my person. By rights, you should hang from these walls as an example to others who would defy rightful authority." Gareth felt his heart sink, even as he had known this moment would come. "However," Lord Aldrich continued, "you have also shown qualities that are rare in any man, noble or common. You saved the life of my most trusted knight when you could have chosen revenge. You showed mercy to your enemy, and in doing so, you have taught us all something about the true nature of justice." The Lord turned to address his assembled court. "Let it be known throughout the realm that Gareth of Millhaven, once outlaw and thief, is hereby pardoned of all past crimes. More than that, for his service to Sir Edmund and his demonstration of true nobility of spirit, I offer him a choice. He may take gold and land and live as a free man, or Lord Aldrich paused, his eyes twinkling with something that might have been amusement. "He may take service as a knight in my household, with all the honors and responsibilities that such service entails." The hall erupted in gasps and murmurs of astonishment. Gareth felt his knees grow weak, and only Sir Edmund's steadying hand kept him upright. "My lord," Gareth managed to whisper, "I am not noble-born. I have no training in the arts of knighthood." "Nobility," Lord Aldrich replied, "is not a matter of blood, but of deeds. And as for training, Sir Edmund, would you accept this man as your squire, to teach him the ways of knighthood and chivalry?" Sir Edmund's face broke into the first genuine smile Gareth had seen from him. "For it would be my greatest honor, my lord." And so it was that in the great hall of Ravenshollow Castle, witnessed by lords and ladies, knights and common folk, Gareth the Outlaw knelt before Lord Aldrich and swore the oath of service that would transform him from criminal to protector, from hunted to honored. Sir Edmund stood beside him as sponsor and mentor, his hand resting on Gareth's shoulder in a gesture of brotherhood that sealed their unlikely bond. Years later, when bards sang the tale of Sir Gareth the Merciful, for that was the name by which he came to be known, they would speak of the outlaw who became a knight through an act of compassion shown to his greatest enemy. They would tell of the wounded knight who found in his rescuer not just a healer of bodies but a healer of souls. And they would remind all who heard the tale that true nobility lies not in the circumstances of one's birth, but in the choices one makes when the world is watching, and especially when it is not. In the end, Gareth learned that mercy given freely returns threefold, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through conquest, but through the simple act of treating one's enemy as a fellow human being worthy of compassion. His grandmother's words had proven true. Every choice writes itself upon the soul in letters that cannot be erased, but some letters, written in moments of grace and mercy, shine with a light that can transform not just one life, but an entire realm. The outlaw had become a knight, not through birthright or deed of arms, but through the oldest and most powerful magic of all, the transformation that occurs when hatred gives way to understanding, and when mercy triumphs over the desire for revenge.